So if you want to just throw a note in the chat, I'd love to hear where everyone's joining us from and what your role is. Give you a second to do that. Excellent. Alexandria, represent. See some people still typing there. This is the most exciting part of the webinar. Actually, it's, I do like to hear where people are from. Excellent. Business owner, marketing communication coordinator, web design, fantastic. Well, this is great. Well, again, thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Roventine. I'm a web designer here at CYBErsprout. I've been designing websites for a little over 2 decades now. This was the most popular website when I first got into the field. I don't want to say that I've single-handedly improved the quality of the web, but things certainly have gotten better. I'll let you connect those dots. It is something I do strive to do every day, is try to make the web a better place. But this does illustrate that things have changed quite a bit in the last couple decades. They change a bit every year. Most importantly, visitors are much more savvy now, and they have much higher standards for websites. They are not going to tolerate websites that don't deliver in terms of what they're looking for. So this may be why you're here. So the big question, does your site need a makeover? Well, there's a couple ways you can determine that. You probably thought about that. And again, that's why you decided to join us. Does any of this sound familiar? Your information's out of date, your branding's inconsistent, maybe you're using an older version of a logo, or it's different than your printed materials. You're not getting leads, or at least not as many as you used to from the website. You might have a high bounce rate. So if you're looking at your analytics and people are coming and spending a very short amount of time on your page or no time on your page and immediately bouncing right off, that could be a high bounce rate. Otherwise, your design just feels drab. So all of these are great reasons to look at your site and take a step back, look at it from a user perspective, and determine if you want to get a web makeover. My advanced not working. There we go. So the areas we're going to target today are 5 key areas where you can make a huge visual impact with a little bit of effort. And I'm hoping that you can pick and choose from these. You certainly don't have to tackle all 5 on every single site, but if you can find a few, I think it's going to really make a big impact on your site. And of course, we'd love to hear afterwards what you've come up with. So let's get started. Before we dive in, let me stick this up here. I did just post this post on our blog with tons of free resources in all of these categories and more. So if you want to bookmark this, it'll be a great reference. I'll reference a few of these throughout, but there'll be a lot of great tools and sites in there that will help you as you go forward. Leave that up for another second. All right. So let's get started with photography. So this is probably the most underrated element of a website in terms of kind of a low-hanging fruit item for a makeover. Throw up this stat here. The brain processes 60,000 times faster than text. This is a prime opportunity for you to get your impression of your website jump-started by having great images before they even read the text, to be able to get the jolt from those images. So if you don't have great images on your site, now's the time to do that. If you do, you can always make them, you probably make them better. These are some common sources of great photography. You can go to a professional photographer, you can do it yourself. You can use stock photos. There's plenty of paid and lots of free options out there, or you could use Creative Commons photos. I'll go through each of these quickly here. So if you're going to use a professional or you're going to do it yourself, the goal is the same for both. You want to capture real people in real settings doing real things. You don't want it to be overly posed or overly orchestrated. Here are some great examples by our own other web designer here, Beth Leipoltz, in her Spirit and Soul photography. These are great looking photos showing people being natural, doing their job. These are exactly the kind of things you should aim for, whether you're taking them yourself or hiring a professional. Here's another example by a friend of mine who runs Puke Rainbows photography and video. So just you can see in these the real personality of the subject is coming through. They don't feel staged, even though there's some lighting and things like that set up. But they tell the story. So this is kind of what you want to aspire to. What you don't want to do, especially if you're using stock photos, actually, let me make a note about stock photos. Perfectly fine to use stock photos. In some cases, in many cases, it's expensive to hire a professional photographer, and that just isn't in the budget. Or with the pandemic, it wasn't possible for a lot of people to come together and do photos, especially without masks. So stock photos are a viable situation for most people, and it's a great way to supplement some photos maybe that you've done yourself. It's always good to have something, a photo you're building, a photo of your team, and then you supplement with stock photos. However, you want to avoid this type of stuff. So overly posed, cliched, just ridiculous, the people floating there in nothingness. The kind that people make fun of, and they just don't connect with your audience, and they certainly could turn off your audience. So we want to avoid these. Another couple to avoid are these huge fake emotions or unrealistic environments. I'm obsessed with this girl with the laptop lately. She's been popping up in a bunch of my searches, just sitting there without her shoes on in this alley, doing whatever she's very excited about. That's not the direction you want to go. The other thing to remember is that, as designers and, we have a responsibility to show all of society and all of our audience, all of our visitors. So remember things like diversity and inclusivity, include, certainly pay attention to genders. Just think about your audience, think about the makeup of your audience, and try to reflect as much of that audience as possible in your stock photo choices. There are more choices than ever that allow for diversity. So take the extra little bit of time to dig in there and see what you can find. And it will be that much more beneficial on your website. And, here's just a few I pulled that could work really well for, say, a landscaping company or a lakeside resort or a local restaurant. I mean, there's always photos you can pull that feel professional. They don't feel overly stocky. These are all free options, by the way, that can resonate with your audience and really make a connection. So it's a great opportunity to keep that connection alive there. Creative Commons photos. So if you don't know about Creative Commons, I wrote a whole post on this. There's a link at the end in some further resources. But essentially, it's a licensing setup that's kind of a next level for copyright, some rights reserved licenses. So creators can select a specific Creative Commons license and determine exactly how their work to be used, whether it's to be shared, whether it's to be remixed. It can be the fodder for other work. It can inspire other work. It's all in there, and it's pretty simple to kind of get a handle of the different licenses. And for the most part, what they're asking in return is an attribution. Some of them are specifically non-commercial, so you can't use them to sell things, make T-shirts and things like that. But the licenses are pretty liberal, pretty freeing, and there are literally billions of works out there that you can take advantage of. One of the best ways to find them is with Creative Commons search. So it's just search.creativecommons.org. It lets you search, as you see here, 500 million images, sorts them by license, and gives you all the information you need to attribute and find the original and make sure that you're using actual Creative Commons images. But there's a wide range out there, and I just want to look at some more creative options for your photography. I would strongly advise checking Creative Commons out. And finally, a note about image optimization. If you're not familiar with image optimization, it's basically trying to reduce the file size of your image, but keeping the quality consistent and good. So on a website, you're going to use a lower resolution image than you would, say, for a print piece. And that's good. You don't want to be pushing all of that information for a giant image size down to screen resolution. So there are tools in the blog post I mentioned. There's lots of tools out there in image editors where you can optimize your image for web. You certainly should do that. And then the benefits are going to be, first and foremost, your images are going to load faster, which could make your page load faster, which is huge nowadays, not only for visitors, but Google looks at that. And it can improve your SEO. It can make your backups run faster for sure. And it can reduce your hosting costs if you have less file space for images. So all of these are great things to look at, but definitely if you're going to redo your photos and update them, certainly work image optimization into your process. Excuse me. All right. Fonts. This is a love of mine. We're going to just focus on one aspect here. It's been said that web design is 95% typography. There's certainly a lot of typography to any modern web design. Web fonts are, if you're not familiar with them, are basically, there's a wide range of fonts out there that you can use aside from the old standards, Arial and Times New Roman and things like that, where you can just connect up a small file through something like Google Fonts, and they'll work everywhere. They'll look pretty darn great. You can use this now to pull in the actual font, say in your branding guide, if you have such a thing, or you could pull in from, literally hundreds of thousands of other open source or independent fonts out there. So great place to start thinking about this. And, fonts in general, aside from being such a big part of your website, have a huge visual impact. So you want to consider things like legibility and contrast with your background and all that stuff when you're picking a font. So you go to Google Fonts and you could look at all the different options, all the different styles. Sometimes you get a little lost in which ones are being used, which ones are worthwhile. Pretty easy to do a Google search and you come up with a good list. Roboto is one of the most popular ones right now. But, there's really no limit. For the most part, the Google fonts are decent, pretty legible across the board, as long as you're not making some crazy choices and using scripts for all of your fonts and things like that. But it's worth, playing around and kind of testing some different fonts out, and you can make a huge impact in how your site lays out and how it looks. One of the things, the easy thing about Google Fonts is many of them are already connected in the example here on the left to a theme. If you're using WordPress, just go to your customizer and look. In your typography settings, you may have a big list like this where you can just start choosing the fonts. You can go to Google Fonts, you can see the preview of them, and then you can choose them here. Otherwise, you could use a plugin like this and connect them up like that. But pretty simple to at least get started. One of the great things that I like to do to get inspired about what other web font options are out there, I'll go to a site that I like and see a font that I'm interested in, like this beautiful script here on the Explore Alex site, and I use a Chrome extension called What Font, and it allows me, when I to just point to a section of the screen, and it will give me the information about the font. So then I could go and possibly get that for myself and use that on my site. It's a great tool that I use multiple times a day, and it's free. Again, that's in that list of resources that I shared earlier. Moving on to icons. So icons, I love this quote about none capture the imagination so much as icons of all the objects that occupy our digital spaces. The great thing about icons are that they are universal. They at least can be, depending on the icons you use. They add visual interest, can attract attention, aid understanding, highlight special content or data. They're easily customized, and they can be really powerful elements of your layout. So if you aren't using icons to, say, call out service offerings or identify elements in a timeline, or any other thing like that, it might be something to consider. It certainly can perk up a very text-heavy page and help people have little clues as to where to look. When you're pairing them, you obviously try to go for consistency as much as possible. So the group on the left, similar style, size, level of detail, they're all roughly the same. There's a reason for that. I chose them from a collection by a single creator. So that is a great way to get consistency. But if you are going to pick and choose and mix things up, try to avoid the grouping on the right. You don't want, vastly different styles and sizes. That's not going to help aid your visitor. It's actually going to confuse them. Another couple tips for icons. They're really easy to customize. You can just add a little spot color here. Imagine that kind of pinky purple is your brand color. It's a great way to make them feel custom to you, is to just drop a little spot color in there. And also, if you're using them without any sort of label around them, make sure that they're immediately apparent, like a 6-year-old understands what they are. Otherwise, you got to label them. So, if you're using them to tie into service offerings or anything, get a little they are, but make sure they're tied to something that explains them, or you're kind of losing the benefit of the icons. Here's a couple examples, just nice examples across the web. Flywheel has a great set here to talk about the different brands they have, and they've built complexity with these across these 4 icons here. We use icons on our website. Again, they may not be immediately apparent what they are, so I'm tying them into our different service offerings there. And hotels.com has tons of icons all over the place, from icons in their navigation, and this is where it's if you're going to use icons in the nav or in your header, it's really important to make sure that they're immediately recognizable. So you have the flag there. They have a little note, or the little calendar for bookings. They have calendars in their search. It's great to enhance searches like this. They've called out their travel points down there. So and they've also broken them up nicely with color, so they don't feel overwhelming. Nice use of icons there. Moving on to buttons. So specifically, the type of buttons I'm talking about are call to action buttons. And 70% of small business websites don't have a call to action button on their homepage. This is an easy thing to remedy. Call to action buttons can be for an average small business website. That could be for things like getting a quote, or scheduling appointments, signing up for email updates, or just contacting you. So the best way to word these and get the most results out of them is to use first person short, actionable words, large, legible text, very strong contrast color. And try not to compete with yourself by having too many of these going on the page at the same time. You want to guide that action, not confuse your user with too many options in terms of buttons. Here are some nice examples just of high contrast or just calls to action that do a good job for Netflix and Zippia search there, and ours, that green one is from our website. Evernote, again, it's really clear. The reason I did most of the page there, when you take a step back and look at it, it's really clear. You do the squint test, and that call to action button still pops right out. So it's doing a great job. So this is what you want to strive for. And if you don't have an easy way to add buttons to your current setup, I mean, most sites, whether it's a WordPress site or other, have some kind of widget or module or block for adding a button and then coloring it. But if for some reason you don't have that or you don't want to get involved in that, there are lots of button generators out there. Here's a great example. You drop in your text and colors, and you can tweak virtually every element of it. And then when you're done, it will spit out a little code you can drop on your page. And then finally, color. So this one's tricky. We could do a whole series of webinars on color, but I wanted to at least touch on a few different things. This speaks to the double-edged sword of color here with this Claude Monet quote. But depending on where you're coming from, you may not have a lot of color going on your website. It's important. It's huge. It's the first impression visitors get. It can create strong emotional connections. You don't want to underestimate its power. So you could start simple. And again, I'm imagining a site with one or two colors right now. Branch off and give yourself a little depth. Start with one main color. That could be your core branding color if you have a brand guide. Most of this example is going to be for people who don't have brand guides and maybe not know where to go. So a good first step is to add a darker shade of the same color, for example. Find a contrasting color for impact. That you can use for your call to action buttons, and just kind of see how that goes. That should give you a little bit of depth. You get a little more complicated and create more of a color scheme. Start with your logo color, add a second darker, lighter color, learn just a little bit about the color wheel, and then you'll learn things about what a complementary color is and opposite ends of the color wheel based on your brand color. And look at some online palettes again, or some other sites for inspiration, and that will help you add one or two additional colors to the mix. Add a neutral tone in there, and through the whole thing, you want to check for accessibility. You want to make sure that the contrast of your fonts and elements on these colors, especially for a background, are legible and clear. So this hopefully get you started in the right direction, but don't be afraid to play with color and add some elements to your site. Even if it's just changing the background color of some elements on your homepage, that can have a huge impact, and especially guide people in creating sort of a visual hierarchy of what's important on your page. So here's some further reading on all of these items. And I wanted to leave a significant chunk of time here for us to be able to tackle questions and answers, because I know the specifics are really what's gonna help with this. So why don't we move to Q&A, and if you want to just add your questions to the chat there, we'll flag them and I can call them out. All right. So we're going to start publish. There we go. So accessibility, you're going to talk about how accessibility plays a role in design these days. So it really touches so many of these different elements that I talked about today, from having proper alt tags and information on photos, to checking the contrast and things like that of fonts, and tying into colors. We, again, as designers, have a responsibility to make sure that the broadest possible audience can interact with and consume our work and view our work. So that includes people with range of disabilities that may be presenting a challenge to that in terms of a digital medium. So full ADA accessibility is certainly, there are a number of guides and sort of checklists that you can run your site through. But from a design standpoint, I always try to approach it at the very beginning to make sure that the contrast is great across the board for people with even certain types of color blindness can affect contrast, all the way through to people who are using screen readers wanting to have proper descriptions for photos and videos and design elements on the page. So it certainly can weave through all of that. Good question. Yeah, other questions from people who may have a specific element of their site that they're wondering about. Oh, here's another good one. So my favorite stock photo webpage. Well, I put a handful of my favorites in the resources post that I shared. I love free stock photo sites with that are really good quality. I've been digging through a lot of the sites that are focused on diversity and really telling more of that full story lately. The Noun Project Photo Project, or Noun Project Photos, is a newer one that I've added to my list. They have a great selection of icons that they may be more well known for, but they've recently started a very diversity focused stock photo collection that's really wonderful, and definitely caught my attention. It's something I've been going to more and more lately. I have a question for people if you're looking for, if you're still thinking about questions to ask me. How many people out there are using stock photo resources right now? You could just do a IM or something, jump in the post. Okay. Are these paid or free predominantly? Okay, a mix of both. Not really on the website, but other marketing, mix of both. Okay, nice. How many feel, it seemed like we had a few designers in the mix there. How many people feel comfortable making some of these changes on their site? Or do you think you may need to pull in the assistance of someone else? Oh, that's a good question. So how often should a website have a makeover? Well, the first question you should ask yourself is how happy you are with the current state of your site and how well it's serving your audience. Do any of those elements that I mentioned at the beginning strike a chord? Is your information up to date? Are you delivering everything that you need to deliver to your visitors? Does it represent who you are visually? If the answer is no to any of those, that's a great time to have a makeover. In terms of if that needs to happen on a regular timetable, probably not. But you do want to always strive to present, who you are right now to and the latest face, if you will, to the world through your site. So if your site doesn't do that, you should definitely look into a makeover. If you're dealing with a number of performance issues, it's really slow. You're having some real trouble converting visitors to customers, things like that. That's when you may want to consider a refresh isn't the best option, and maybe a redesign is in store. But certainly talk to a web professional about that. But as long as your site is doing its job and showing who you are, you're in good shape. Otherwise, I'd definitely go for makeover. Let's see, we have another question here. So other than optimization, are there other methods for increasing loading speed? Oh yeah, absolutely. So image optimization is probably the biggest culprit because there's, in many cases, a lot to compress that may not be compressed there. But you could try, there's a number of different plugins, especially for WordPress, that will take out the bulk, if you will, of your different scripts. So it will minimize your style sheets, and it will and your JavaScript and things like that. Those can definitely be big culprits as well. Depending on the site that you go to for your analysis of your speed, you may be able to get some really specific ideas of what's slowing you down, and then you can target that. In some cases, you may want to divest yourself of some of the plugins that are slowing you down in favor of others, or in favor of options that don't involve plugins. If that turns out to be the sticking point, but I would certainly look at JavaScripts, especially, could be a big culprit there. So I would check that out. WP Rocket is great. That's a good one for sure. Oh, and Tyler has another suggestion here. Yeah, GTmetrix is a great speed test tool, and that will really break down where the slow points are, so you can tackle those specifically. We'll really get under the hood for you. Thanks, Tyler. It's a great suggestion. Let's see. Any other questions that I missed here? All right. Well, let me get back to this. I appreciate everybody's time and that your questions. We are having a special audit package that's available this week. If you want to email Tyler or myself, we can give you more information about that. And speaking of Tyler, next month on the 14th, he'll be doing our webinar on how to be found in local Google searches. You can join him in person at the Glenwood Chamber of Commerce or via Zoom here. And all the information is on our website. So with that, I will bid you adieu. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much.